Welcome to the No Country Podcast. This time, Brad Wilson discusses the music of Canon Blue with Daniel James and special guest Casper Clausen from the Danish group Efterklang.
Welcome to the No Country for New Nashville podcast. This episode, incredibly pumped to be hanging with a gentleman whose brand of lush orchestral pop garnered critical acclaim on his second full-length, Rumspringa. Currently writing for his third full-length, absolutely delighted to have on the podcast Daniel James, a.k.a. Canon Blue.
Good to be here.
What's up, dude? How you been?
Not much, man. I'm good. I'm really good.
Dan, it's been too long.
It's been a long time, yeah.
It's
we have some history for sure.
We absolutely do, and we can go into that later. But aside from being foes on the basketball court, Dan and I also have a mutual appreciation for music and have gone way back from the college radio days. But it's been coming close to 4 years since Rumspringa came out.
Yes, it is. Yeah,
came out in 2011. An absolutely incredible record.
Thank you.
What have you been doing since then?
Man, I after the record came out, I probably spent a year and a half touring and promoting it, and did a bunch of tours, and kind of when I would be off the road, I would start writing a little bit, and I just kind of started getting into production and produced like 3 or 4 records, I think, in the meantime, since that record came out. So I stayed pretty busy with that. And then about this time last year, I started really kind of honing in on the next album and trying to figure out what I wanted to do and how I wanted to change things from the previous record, and been kind of in that ever since.
Yeah. Well, before we kind of dive into the third album that you're working on and the production that you've been taking part in, just kind of backing up. I mean, this isn't your first rodeo. You've,
right.
I don't think I've ever used that phrase in my entire life.
Why not? Let's go with it.
Okay. But you've been doing this for a while. Your debut full-length, Colonies, came out in 2007.
Yeah.
But before that, kind of let's back up. You're from Virginia.
Yeah.
Correct?
So I grew up in this tiny town. Well, it's not tiny, but a small town called Williamsburg. And most people know it for all the historical stuff that's there. Is this Colonial Williamsburg and Jamestown, Yorktown, all that stuff. So it's kind of a fascinating place to grow up. Looking back, it's kind of a unique town to experience, and but it's very non-musical. It's kind of just a random spot for that kind of stuff. To grow up in.
Well, what got you into music specifically?
I think I was. Luckily, being born in the 80s, I still, when I was coming up, college radio was really big still, and there's a lot of record stores. I mean, there's probably, for the size of my town, there's probably like 4 or 5 record stores, which is crazy to think about now.
Yeah.
And I was just obsessed with music from the earliest memory I have, and I would just kind of devour magazines and records and just kind of read interviews and see what other bands I liked mentioned. And I just go, and this is back in the day before you could listen to stuff before you bought it. So you're buying stuff because of the label it's on, or because you like the cover, or you heard, it's just like you're taking a risk back then. It's like, I just mowed a yard. I got $20. I'm banking on this album that I have no idea what it sounds like.
What's the first kind of band you geeked out on?
The first band I kind of became obsessed with was this band called Starflyer 59.
Oh yeah.
And I still go back to them, a lot. And I think they kind of just touched on something that was the first band I heard that had this kind of darkness that I don't know what it was, but I just really responded to it.
Yeah.
And it just kind of had this, it put me in this mood that I loved. And as a kid, you're not often in situations like that, and it was kind of just like, whoa, what is this? I didn't know this kind of stuff existed. I didn't know I could feel this way just listening to music, you know? And that kind of began my love affair with that kind of environment, you know, musically.
I mean, Jason Martin.
Jason
right?
Martin, yeah.
You know, Starflyer 59 still is one of the most underrated bands that should have absolutely destroyed the mainstream, but they, for some reason, have been criminally underexposed, you know, even though they're commonplace to maybe your eye as far as
sure.
And that's a total tragedy considering how consistent their records have been.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I've always had this fantasy, like if I ever blow up and just have money to waste or just throw around, I'm like, I would pay money to have him come out, bring his whole family and get an amazing band together, just a tour, just so people could get to experience it. Because he just never had that exposure like you're talking about that I feel he deserves.
What's one Starflyer album you'd recommend?
I mean, the one that I started with that was kind of my the first record that changed my life, I would say, is this record called The Fashion Focus.
Yeah.
And I think it was probably his fourth album. And I listened to that every day for months, you know, and it's like I was probably 12 when it came out. I remember I got it for Christmas, and that year I got a Discman and I got that record, and we had the most insane ice storm that year, and the power was out in our town for a week. And I just remember had this distinct memory of just like getting a bunch of batteries and just listening to that record over and over and over because there's just no power and there's nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And so I just have this, it's just like that memory is soundtracked by that album, you know? And that's kind of the first really strong musical connection I ever had.
My experience with a Discman wasn't quite as cool. The first CD I ever got, I was equally as stoked, was Coolio's Fantastic Voyage.
Okay.
CD single.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely influential on my life, as you could tell.
I love Coolio too. He's a cool dude.
But you know what? But that's the kind of thing, though. It is those sort of things. You know, for me, if I'm going back, it's like there was this B movie called Eddie and the Cruisers. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you ever saw it. 80s classic, like midnight movie kind of thing. Tom Berenger, and about this great, you know, early 60s bar band, sounds exactly like the E Street Band, and from New Jersey, the Boardwalk, and you know, their singer disappears, but it was just like this killer soundtrack of like, literally, I found out later in life that every song was essentially a ripoff of Born to Run, but at the time, it was awesome.
Yeah,
and I remember my dad snuck me. The band that performed all the music was this guy named John Cafferty. John Cafferty in the Beaver Brown Band.
Man, that's a great name.
It is killer name, right? Maybe like kind of a side project.
Totally, yeah.
But my dad snuck me into the show wherever John Cafferty was playing, and it was like, that was kind of one of my moments where it was like, my dad played in bar bands all the time when I was growing up, and so like him like playing these songs on the piano when we were at home or whatever, like, as cheesy as these things sound, like that was kind of a big moment for me, because that was like the first kind of connecting point, you know. And as like kind of lame as it sounds, like I took a beginner's piano class in college just to learn a song from that soundtrack. Yeah. So that was the major nerd alert story. It's Coolio and Starflyer 59 here. Man. There's a reason why your music is awesome and I don't create any music. And that was just summed up in that story. But okay, so you're from Virginia. You grew up there. Participated in a lot of Civil War reenactments, I assume.
No, thankfully no.
But what a lot of people may not know is that you and Gavin McDonald, drummer of Paper Route, were, you know, BFFs.
Yeah, we've known each other our whole lives.
You guys played in bands together. What did you guys come to Nashville together? How did you end up?
No, we came separately. Gavin. After high school, we kind we went to England together to try and make something happen, and that didn't work. And then he decided to go back to college, and I moved out here. I was probably 19 then, and he ended up going to Kansas City for a while.
Yeah.
And then I roped him into a band in New Orleans that we played in for a while, and then eventually we ended up here. But there was probably 5 years where I was here and he was elsewhere, you know.
And that was the first time that I met you, is because back in 2006, you were kind of the auxiliary guy for Paper Route.
Totally.
And just we did a in studio at a radio station I was at, and Paper Route came in. Dan walks in with a typewriter and just destroys the place. Yeah. Still considered one of the most underrated typists.
Right. Yeah. Totally.
But that's cool. So like with you and Gavin, Gavin's played with Canon Blue throughout the years.
Yeah, we kind of, you know, even he played with me even recently. Like, we still love when we can make scheduling work to play together and have him come out on shows. And I've sat in with Paper Route maybe a year ago for a show for one thing, and so we still try to find ways to stay connected, you know.
Yeah, and you guys have, I'm assuming you guys have continued to work together on like various other projects, like your production stuff that you
I mean, I've had Gav, totally. Gav's played on a couple records I produced, and I mean, I just love him to death, and we have such a history together that there's so much unspoken connection that it's so. We just have years and years of communicating and reading each other that we don't really need to talk much when we're in the studio. So that's a really nice thing to have when you're trying to work through ideas or, develop songs, just to have that connection with somebody in the room.
Absolutely. So you're here in Nashville, 19, you're developing this project. How did Canon Blue come to? I mean, because Canon Blue essentially is you.
Yeah.
It's never really been a technical full band thing, correct?
Yeah. I just always been writing, and I think after the real kind of genesis of Canon Blue started when after New Orleans, I'd been living down there for a while and gone through a tough breakup, and like the band kind of wasn't going where everyone was hoping it was going to go, and then Katrina hit at the end of that period, so it was just kind of like a lot of really intense, heavy things were hitting at the same time. So I had actually decided to leave New Orleans probably a week before Katrina hit. Like, it wasn't even on the Weather Channel yet, and I was just like, I got to get out of here. And I just packed up my car and I moved home to Virginia for a couple months, and then, Katrina, I'm like sitting at home with my parents, and I look on the TV and like, oh my goodness, like the place I was living was like under 10 feet of water. Like, I would have just left my car there if all my stuff would have been stolen. And so it was kind of this weird feeling, like, man, like, I don't know. It just like, it was a strange sensation that like you just missed a lightning strike or something,
Yeah.
And it was just such a horrible experience for so many people that were there, and obviously there's a lot of tragedy in that situation, and I kind of took that along with what I was experiencing personally and just started writing songs, and that kind of became my first record. I was kind of just making an EP for some friends and just to do it, and I just kept writing, and then all of a sudden I had a full album, and everyone in my friend group seemed to like it, so I was like, oh cool, maybe I'll just try to make it something, and like kind of, this will be the first proper Canon Blue release, and that's kind of what started it.
Well, Dan, what if I told you, we're talking about the band's history.
Yeah.
What if I told you I had a surprise for you?
Oh no.
That all the way from Berlin here in Nashville, just for the podcast, co-producer of your second full length, Rumspringa.
Yes.
I'm gonna butcher.
Casper.
How do you pronounce your last name again? Clausen. So Dan, all the way from Berlin, co-producer of Rumspringa, close friend Casper Clausen. Did I get it? Okay.
That'll work.
Okay, guys. Yeah, it takes a lot to get through the day, to be me.
Hey, man,
but
we've all been there.
But literally, Casper's here right now.
He is. He flew in just for this interview.
He's in this room. I called him up at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, Casper, so stoked to have you joining us. For all you fans at home, Casper from an incredible band from Copenhagen, Efterklang, one of the most critically acclaimed bands from that area. Thanks so much for joining us, hanging us out, by the way.
Thanks for having me.
I want to ask you first, before we dive in, you know, this is going to surprise some people. He didn't actually fly in just for this podcast, but you're in Nashville right now. What brought you here?
Well, I'm basically here because I know Dan, and I like Nashville, and this is my third time. We played here last year, and I've been here once before just visiting Dan, but at that time, I was thinking it would be great to just spend a bit more time here.
Yeah.
Get to casually hang with Dan. I've only been hanging with Dan on tours, and so it just, or when we've been working on the album or something like that, which has always been a bit stressful. So
we've had a very stressful relationship.
It's basically just hanging out a bit. Maybe we've been recording a bit. Just we can't really help it, I guess. It's kind of part of a hobby, being a musician as well.
Yeah. So you co-produced the second full length, Rumspringa. Dan, you played and toured with Efterklang.
Mm-hmm.
But it even goes back even further. Berlin, Denmark. One of the most surprising things about Canon Blue is that you're from Nashville, but you could easily be labeled a European band.
Right.
It's almost that's your tag, and obviously Casper is a huge part of that. How Colonies came out, as well as the following EP came out through Casper, your guys' label, and you've done a lot of work there. Like, kind of back us up. How did you guys even get connected?
So this goes back to the MySpace days.
Oh yes,
that we all remember.
Good old MySpace days, yeah.
Yeah. So after I'd made my record, I hand made the packaging and was meticulously sewing all this stuff and making things really difficult for myself for no reason. And I decided that I would just kind of reach out to some people I was fans of, and MySpace all of a sudden like, hey, this person might actually read this, you're thinking. And so I had like a list of probably 10 or 15 people whose art I really respected, and I just emailed them like, hey, can I send you my record? And Casper was the only person that wrote back, and I'm eternally grateful for that, because that's kind of where the story kind of got some legs, and kind of I was able to start doing something. And we just started emailing a little bit and passed it on to another guy in the band, Rasmus, who runs the label, and that led to them putting it out, the first album. That's kind of where our story and connection began, really.
So Casper, Dan emails you on MySpace. What was it about his music that you gravitated towards?
Usually, when I'm turned on by music, I'm turned on by someone having something special to say, not necessarily lyrically, but just in the music being something that I'm fascinated by, and I think that's exactly what happened there. I think one of the first songs I really got hooked on was Odds and Ends. I think that song just got stuck with me, and I was begging the other guys in the band to we should put this out, and we hadn't really put out any music at that point, not much at least. So this would, it was a kind of a chance for us to take. It would be an investment for us to do. So I don't remember exactly what it was. I just remember that there was something very special here, and I feel maybe just writing with Dan at the time, and also just discussing what kind of things we were into. And Dan would ask for like all kind of obscure Danish bands, and like to be able to pick up funny Danish band. So we would we just felt we were on the same page basically, and listening to his music was just one of those experiences where I felt like immediately in love with it, and then you're at a point where you're kind of talking to the guy. It's not like just listening to music. You're like, and it creates a different kind of field, and so it was just no doubt about it. And the rest of the guys in the band were just let's do it. It's great.
So Rum Racket put out your Canon Blues debut full-length, Colonies, as well as the follow-up EP.
Yeah, and the next full-length as well. They they handled it in Scandinavia, and then we partner with a label in New York called Temporary Residence, who kind of took the lead for the rest of the world.
Okay, I was actually going to ask you about that, because I wasn't aware that Rum Racket was involved with Rumspringa. I thought it was exclusively...
Well, they were very connected in the sense that like the new label I ended up at was through Rasmus again, and he kind of you could probably speak to this. I think the band was Efterklang was kind of taking up so much time. The label was made it more challenging to run.
Exactly. I think that Rumspringa record means a hell of a lot to Efterklang and to Romarkit, because actually the last record we put out. So it was the last one we did, and on many levels. I guess you will be talking about that anyway. But we were involved in that record in so many ways, and of course just like putting it out was something special. We still put out records on Romarkit, but as Dan was saying, we got so busy, so at the moment we only do our own ones in Scandinavia. So Dan was the last sort of outsider to be released.
So you co-produced Rumspringa. Before that, had you guys worked together on any official capacity like that?
I don't think so.
Colonies there was a little bit of things, but that was really like email.
Totally, yeah.
Nothing really physical.
Right.
And
I feel Rumspringa was the kind of, because I was writing it as we were on tour together. So like I'd be in the van between shows on headphones working on stuff, and I'd be like, "Hey Casper, what do you think of this?" And also Maz in the band also co-produced it with us. So we bouncing off ideas to each other, and working on arrangements. And so with Rumspringa, they were incredibly involved from very early on in the process,
So kind of reflecting the album, it's hard to believe that it's been 3 years since it was released. The album was birthed out of this idea. You had this interest in making an electronic record with natural instruments. Like, what was the vision for Rumspringa compared to what were you doing in your bedroom before Colonies?
I mean, the main difference that I really wanted to explore with this one was like Colonies was a very singular, isolated record, like me and headphones on a laptop, and I wanted to like do the exact opposite. So I was like, more people we can have, the better. So it's like I was like, let's do brass, let's do strings, let's have 3 drummers, let's have a choir, I just wanted to like have a very communal experience to kind of just to know what that felt like, as opposed to this very singular thing that I had before. So that was kind of the main approach, I would say. And just kind of, I think being with Efterklang so much around that time, I kind of got exposed to a new way of making music and incorporating more classical things. And I grew up listening to classical music, but never really had thought to incorporate it into what I was doing. And I loved what they had done in that world and kind of blending those two together. So I just was like really fascinated with that. And so I took that, and I just I was also listening to a lot of electronic music, and I was like, I just had this idea that kept coming back to me of like what it would be like to take an electronic record like 100 years in the past and just give it to a bunch of classical musicians and tell them to try to recreate it. And that was kind of like the story that I used to kind of guide what I was doing, and kind of was the main, I mean, it definitely ended up it wasn't fully that, but that was kind of the main idea, I guess, musically behind it.
Yeah, in the string section that you used on the record, played on some pretty amazing records, Sigaros, string section. How, I know you're a big Sigaros fan. I mean, that had to be
totally.
a total. I mean, that would be a total trip for to have them on the record. How did that come together?
Yeah, well, I mean, you guys have been friends. Afterclang's been friends with them for years, and I think they even played with you, right? Back in the day?
Two of the girls did, yeah. Hildur and Etta were we were searching for string players back in the days in Copenhagen, and we're kind of also just starting out the band and putting out a note on the conservatorium and asking for string players. We said something like we would be playing music like Radiohead, similar to Sigur Rós or something like that. And this girl called us saying like, "Hello, my name is Hildur, and I'm from Iceland." And she said like, "Well, I'm playing with Sigur Rós, so now I'm in Copenhagen. If you would love to come by and play with you guys." So that's how like they played with us for 2-3 years, and we had that connection going, and they're amazing people. And yeah, I can't remember exactly what happened, but
well, I think I was just obviously obsessed with Sigur Rós and they're playing their records, and knowing that there was a connection there, I was like, hey, would you mind reaching out and seeing if they'd be up for playing on this? Again, not thinking it would ever happen, and they responded right away and were totally up for it, and we're like, okay, let's do it.
Much of Rumspringa, it acts as sort of an acknowledgement for you personally, an acknowledgement that you've fallen into a life of monotony and that lack of freedom that you kind of alluded to was something that you were experiencing, except much of it was self-inflicted.
Yeah.
3 years. It's been 3 years since since that album. I mean, do you still feel like, have you found a way out of that box?
Yeah, I mean, I think a big overarching theme of that record is what do we do with freedom, and I think, I mean freedom more in a personal sense, not like in America freedom kind of way, like more of like a mental and like an acknowledgement of having choice, having power in situations, and not letting yourself feel powerless in things, and kind of asserting yourself. And that's something I've always kind of wrestled with, and I've found as I've gotten older, it becomes a lot easier to find that freedom mentally, and to just kind of settle into your skin a little bit more and be more connected to who you are, and knowing that that's okay. So that's definitely, I think it's a lifelong thing, really. And that record came at a time where I was in the throes of wrestling with all that stuff. It was a very intense time for me, and kind of, it was a period where the way I had been living, and the way I constructed my life, and the way I constructed how I experienced my life, kind of led to a dead end. And so I kind of had this period of like, okay, I can either just give up, or I can try to find a new way of living,
Yeah. What song off of Rumspringa are you the most proud of?
I think the song I connect with the most, and this came from playing it live, I think, was the song Chicago, which is the opening track. It's kind of funny because when I was demoing out the record, I had 20, 30 ideas, and I felt embarrassed by that song for some reason. I thought, I was just too, I don't know, whatever I felt at that time, like it was too cheesy or pop or whatever, and which is a funny thing to think about in this context. But I remember playing all my ideas for my manager, and I was like, this idea I'm probably not going to put on the record, but I just wanted to play it for you. And he like absolutely loved it. It's like, dude, you have to have that on the record. And so ended up finishing it and put it on the album, and it just became like for me, it became like the linchpin of the record. Like I was like, man, I'm really happy I saw that one through just for myself, you know. It's like how other people experience is a whole other conversation, but for me, it's like I was really proud of that, and I felt like I had done something I hadn't done before, and I combined elements in a way I hadn't done before. And then when I transitioned into playing it live, it quickly became the set closer because of it just being the most physical to play and the most enjoyable to play, and it seemed to connect the most with the audience. And so it kind of just quickly rose to the top of the list for me, you know, because of that experience. And there's I connect with it lyrically, and there's some lyrics that I don't even know what they're about, but I feel them, you know. And it kind of has lyrics that I do know what they're about, and I just like that dichotomy of because that's what life is, you know. It's like there's always something you don't understand going on around you. And I kind of like having that balance of those two worlds.
Reflecting on the release, do you consider it a success?
I mean, I'm very proud of it. And success is such a cliche
What does
thing to say.
Success mean?
You know, I mean, I feel like it's kind of like the success comes in completion for me. Completing a thought, like that's where I feel if I can make it that far, I'm proud of it, you know. And like that's enough. And you know, there's obviously, like, I had an amazing label, a great team, and you know, I had guys in Rum Racket, and just I had a great group of people that were made possible because of this record and because of this music. So it's like, I'm so thankful I got to meet like Jeremy Devine, who runs the label I'm on now, is like such a amazing human being and such a true artist, and the way he runs his label is so inspiring to be around. You know, it's like, did it go platinum? No, but it's like I was able to put out something and get connected to meet all these amazing people and given a platform to make another record. And that's really, these days especially, that's like a huge gift, and that's success to me, you know.
Yeah. I know one of your biggest frustrations, especially with having such a lush orchestral record in Rumspringa, was being able to translate that live in a live setting. You've had to play with all these limitations. You've not had the opportunity to, you know, because you would need 10 or 11 people to really recreate it. Do you think you'll ever be able to get to a place to be able to really do that consistently?
You know, I think what's interesting is having toured that record and having experienced that, and it was frustrating to have a record that had so many moving parts, and you want to give every part its, you know, they're children to you, like, oh, I want that string part to be heard, or like I want that brass part to be played, and then you by, you know, the necessity of just circumstance, you kind of have to be very efficient, and so I'm like touring with a 3-piece, 4-piece band, you know, and it's like you just can't really do that every night. It's just financially not possible. So what's interesting though is, like, having gone through that process and experiencing that limitation, it kind of had an inverted effect on me in the sense with this new record. I want to write in a way that I can pull it off with a limited amount, you know, and it kind of informed where I was already headed to in my headspace anyways, of simplifying things and getting more to a core identity of what I'm trying to do, and also like taking more risk and leaving space, which is something I hadn't done before.
Yeah.
And so in a way, it's like, yeah, it'd be nice to be able to tour the 10, 11 piece band all the time, but I'm also thankful for having that experience to kind of help me simplify what I'm doing and kind of feed in this next phase of Canon Blue and the music that I'm making.
I want to talk about all-time albums. By the way, you're listening to the No Country for New Nashville podcast. I'm joined by two esteemed gentlemen, Daniel James, Casper from Efterklang, two legends in their own rights. But I want to talk favorite albums all time. Now, I made the mistake on the last podcast, so it was 5 albums apiece. It took way too long.
Yeah.
So Casper, I respect you. I want to get 2 albums from you. But so I'll let you think about that for a moment. But we'll do a traditional 5.
Okay.
We'll do a classic 5.
Yeah.
Again. So what are 5 albums that will all time get you through the day?
I think when I think about this, I go is like, what are the records that have the strongest memory to me of experiencing like kind of life-changing moments. And I think like the first record for me is, as a kid, I remember I grew up in a very religious family and very kind of exposed to some very intense ideas at a very young age, and I used to be kind of scared to go to sleep as a kid. So I started listening to music, and I had this cassette tape of this monk named John Michael Talbot, and he had a record called The Regathering that he had done in the early 80s with the London Philharmonic, and I just remember like that was the only way I could fall asleep, is to have that tape going. I listened to it for years, every night, and the challenge was to fall asleep before the tape ended, because I'd have to get out of bed to flip the tape over, so like it's like I had to fall asleep before this ends, so that, and I think obviously records you listen to as a kid you experience in a different way as an adult, and I think I still listen to that record from time to time because it connects me to my childhood in a way I really enjoy, in a way that means a lot to me. I can't really explain it, but it's kind of it's a comfort, and it kind of it grounds you in a weird way. So it serves a much different purpose now. I'm not terrified of demons coming out to get me when I'm sleeping.
Yeah.
But so that's kind of the first record I have a strong attachment to. And then the second one would be Starflyer, that the Fashion Focus, and again that memory of this ice storm and listening to this record that you, in a way that you never heard a record like this in your life, and it's like this moodiness and this kind of attitude that I was like, whoa, what is this? Like I'd never experienced this before, and that really, I have a really strong cemented memory of that. And then I think the next one would definitely have to be Radiohead. I remember I missed OK Computer. I remember seeing like Paranoid Android or Chroma Police on MTV or whatnot, but I wasn't fully I wasn't around to like anticipate OK Computer coming out in the way I was for Kid A. And I remember like the night before it came out, like at midnight, the local radio station debuted Idiotech, and I was probably 15, and like I didn't know what I was listening to. Like my mind just got destroyed, And I remember going out to buy it the next day, and I remember playing it for Gavin from Paper Out in the parking lot before school, and be like, "Dude, you got to hear this record, and there's no guitars on it, like what is this? This is crazy. I've never heard this." And I listened to that for probably a year straight, And then, through, and this might be like a 5.5 kind of thing, but like, because of Radiohead, they had a documentary called Meeting People is Easy. And there's this moment that, there's kind of this instrumental sequence, and they have this guy named Scott Walker playing.
Yeah.
And I remember seeing that and not knowing, this is before internet was really doing anything. I'm really aging myself right now, but like, it's like I couldn't just go Google like what is that song? And I always had this faint memory of like this otherworldly voice that made me feel so weird to experience, especially with the visuals of what was going on. And it just was like haunted me, and it wasn't till like 5 or 6 years later that I found out who it was. And I this is right around the time I started working on Colony as the first record, and I got Boy Child, which is his kind of a collection of all his original songs, because he did a bunch of covers and stuff, but all his original songs from like 67 to 70. And it is the most mind-bending stuff, especially for that era. And like just the reverb itself, like there's something I haven't. I'm sure there's been studies on this with sonics and acoustics, but there's something just about the reverb that moves me, and like affects me in this bizarre way that I've never felt with any other artist.
One of the most haunting crooners, one of the greatest.
Yeah,
Scott Walker.
Yeah. So that was a big one for me. And then I guess what are we at now? Is that 3?
I think it's 4.
4. Okay.
We got the Monk.
Yeah, the Monk, Starflyer, Radiohead, Scott Walker, and then Nick Cave would have to be the last one. I remember getting. I'd always read about Nick Cave. I just didn't get it, and it just seemed like this weird goth dude that I didn't really know anything about. And I remember going to the library and I'll just check out this record, and ended up getting Live Orpheus and Abattoir Blues, the double album. And so this was, I guess that came out like 2004 maybe. So I was definitely a late comer to the party. And I didn't like it. I remember listening to it, and I was just like, I still don't get it, man. This is just kind of, I don't know. It's not what I was feeling. And I just remember one night I'd been working on my record all day, and I just put it on one last time. And I think like, what's the opening? Get Ready for Love. The opening track came on, and I was home alone. And I'm just going to crank it. And like something about that moment, like they just had that switch that happens, where things just click. Casper and I have been talking about this, where you see things, you hear about them, you're like, oh, it's cool, I guess. And then you have this moment of intense connection to something that is so transformative. And after that, I just became obsessed and went through his whole catalog and kind of, reading all his lyrics and any biography I could get on him. And I just was like, this guy is unreal. Yeah. Like, he's just unreal. And I've just been obsessed with him ever since. But that record, I feel like, is the pinnacle of him, the Bad Seeds being at the top of their game, his songwriting it was the most focused, one of the more focused records I feel he's made lyrically. And then the partnership of him working with this guy, Nick Lonnie, who he did the album before with him, Nocturama, but something about the stars aligning for that album is just like, that to me is like Nick Cave at his best. And obviously the stuff he's done since is amazing as well, but that is like for me the mountaintop experience,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a killer 5. So Casper, you got to follow that. Give me two or three albums.
Yeah, like once you start thinking about it, there are millions of records. Like just hearing Dan talking about it, there's already a few there that I'd put on my list as well.
Yeah,
but I can pick it up from Nick Cave, because I got a kind of a weird introduction to Nick Cave through a German band called Einstürzen Neubauten, and I know both Dan and I share the obsession with that band. And so started out in the end of the 70s and kind of an industrial band. And I remember listening to their record Silence is Sexy, which is a record from around the millennium, and I was completely mind blown by the sounds. Basically, Einstürzen Neubauten were the first for me to introduce garbage in music, to be honest, and real garbage that would drag in old heaters and huge metal plates and pipes and start playing them. Yeah. Some of the records would be like about air, and they would have like like huge machines spitting out air in different kind of directions, and that would be music. They would make it into music, and they would have this a voice of Blix Barkelt, which is basically was the guitar player in Bad Seeds. So and him and Nick did write a good amount of music together as well. So that one is definitely on the list. And I remember sitting in the studio till 6 a.m. After dragging in old heaters and pipes and stuff like that, and trying to make music that would sound a bit like that. Yeah. Another one would be Godspeed You Black Emperor. Yankee UXO, I think that one, 2002 or something like that. And for me, that was the where I really felt the power of post rock. I guess you'd call that for me where it peaked. Everything after that was just not post rock. I think. So I think I also admire Sigur Rós a lot, but maybe because it's something like the grass is green on the other side or something like that. For me, Godspeed was this kind of mysterious thing that would play, like just being in those long, amazing songs, like 20 minutes builds, were just so inspiring. So that would be 2 records.
Love it.
Mine, yeah.
You guys have a killer list. This is good stuff. Now it's making my Coolio selections not quite as awesome.
Well, my first one might have been Mariah Carey.
Okay, so there we go.
So
Yeah. That would be number 1 on your list. So that the way to make me feel better about my private shame.
Yeah.
I want to talk about some of the production you've been doing for the last few years. You've been you've been producing some great records, doing some remix projects. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. I guess the first thing I did, first full length I did was this band Among Savages. And that was a friend of mine named Peter Barbie. And I just, he had played with me in my band, and I'd known him for a while, and I just really connected to what he was doing, and I felt like we were kind of chasing after the same thing in a way. And I'm always a fan of people that are just grabbing from every genre and and kind of just, there's nothing that's off limits, and he has that approach to music, which I find really inspiring and really exciting. And so we made a full length, and that was kind of the first time I'd ever taken that on. And I'm really proud of what we got, and that kind of gave me the confidence to start, doing other things. So after that, I think, I don't quite remember all the chronology, but
you did Brooke Wagner's full length.
With Chad, and Brooke. I mean, with someone like Brooke, I use the term co-producing lightly because she has such a fully formed vision. You're kind of just there to get her coffee when she needs it, and, and kind of just create a space for her to do her thing, because she's such a gifted and talented artist. She doesn't really need a producer in the way that some artists do. And I think if anything, it's like we can be like the skeleton or the support system to what she's doing.
One of the interesting things that we had talked about whenever I was hanging out with Brooke was how you guys did that record Analog.
Yeah.
Which I thought was so kind of intriguing.
Amazing, yeah.
You and Chad both have a firm history on like laptop music. So had you done anything analog before?
Funny enough, I hadn't produced anything analog, but my band in high school recorded the tape.
Please tell me it was
only
Anchor.
Because Pro Tools wasn't really around back then. But it was so refreshing to be like, you do a pass and there's only 24 tracks, and if you don't like that take, you just do it again, and we were lucky enough to just get some really solid musicians in town that could you could trust them to carry the weight, so you didn't have to do all this editing afterwards. And it was like, oh, this is how people made records in a week back in the day. And it's like, and still do to this day, but it was a nice, very nice change of pace to kind of just go in with a rehearsed band and just knock it out. And like, I think we did the bulk of that record in a week away.
Did that kind of play a role at all in your decision to kind of strip back things on this next full length, or did that come from somewhere else?
Maybe. I don't know if I had that idea fully formed by then, but I looking back, I think like I was saying, it was so refreshing to capture something in the moment rather than like, oh, I'll fix it later, or we'll comp something together. It's like, no, let's create a mood, let's create an environment that people are really inspired by, and let's just execute. And like, that was something that was the biggest takeaway for me from that experience, and something I've been trying to incorporate more and more into what I'm doing.
So as far as the other projects that you've worked on, you recently just finished the Half Noise full length.
Yes.
Which you spent a month in New Zealand.
Yeah, suffering.
That had to be real tough for you. I don't know how you did that.
Man.
You kind of fought through it. But for those of you who don't know, Half Noise is the new project from Zach Farrow, former drummer of Paramore, which you guys were friends before before this full length. You worked on the EP. Going in and producing, working with him, with that sort of reputation or that sort of knowledge of his history in Paramore, did that affect how you approached Half Noise? Did you intentionally try to kind of push your influence on him, or was it just more of an organic?
Yeah, it definitely felt pretty just natural and casual. I mean, we're friends, and I know a couple other guys in the band, and Taylor, the guitarist in there, played the first Canon Blue show. He played guitar for me, so there's like definitely a history and connection to Paramore. And so I think it was just like he sent me a demo of something he did, and he was just, I just made this, and I was like, oh, that's cool. Like if you ever need help working on something, let me know. And we just started going to his house and just kind of having fun and making tracks, and then we're like, oh, that's cool. You should put this out. It's like, yeah, okay. It's just kind of this it wasn't a very like thought out or like grandmaster plan kind of thing. It was just, which is what I love about Zach, is he's so effortless and all, just kind of about just creating like not letting things get too serious or too in your head, not overthinking things. And he just has a very carefree nature, and he writes these amazing songs, but he writes them really quickly. I'm really jealous of how quickly he writes. And but you kind of get that spirit from the music. It's very carefree and kind of there's a lot of depth and heart to it, but it doesn't weigh you down, And that's something I really appreciate about what he does.
So being in New Zealand for a month, what was that experience like?
Well, it was stupid, man. It was we had some friends that let us borrow gear, and a couple people let us use their houses, and I mean everywhere you go there is just paradise. It's unbelievable and so inspiring. And we would just wake up, make breakfast, go surfing, then come back, or try to surf in my case, and then come back and work, break for dinner, and then go on an adventure, like go hiking or something. And it was, again, Zach, to Zach's credit, it's just like he just has this ability of just making things fun and not overbearing. Like it was so refreshing to like, oh, I'm making music, I'm making a record, we're getting a lot of stuff done, and I don't hate myself. So it was like, this is such a novel idea. And so I mean that month was just incredible.
And you've done some remixes for some really incredible stuff. What are some of those?
Well, I did one for a band called Leagues in town. Yeah, with some friends of mine. I did one for this band called Ultraista, they're on my label. It's Nigel Godrich's band. Which was awesome.
That had to be pretty mind blowing.
Yeah. I was, because I grew up listening to Radiohead, obviously, and just such a huge fan of everything he does. So it was definitely a really cool experience to kind of, even just from the producer and me to get to see his file, and what he's doing. And that was really, really cool experience. And I really enjoy the remix process because it kind of gives you freedom to invent a character, because I'm not like a Four Tet or I don't know who another big remixer would be, but just someone that has a very distinct sound. And I would love to get there at some point, but I also love treating remixes like one-off things where I'm like, oh, I've been really interested in this kind of approach, so I'm just going to try this out. And it's like there's no pressure, and you're kind of not too tied up in making it sound like Canon Blue or that kind of thing.
So I'm joined by Daniel James, a.k.a. Canon Blue. You're listening to the No Country for New Nashville podcast. Casper from Efterklang is in town. One of the great. You guys are based out of Copenhagen. Is that?
Well, we started the band in Copenhagen 10, 12 years ago, and now most of the band, me and Mads, are living in Berlin, so in Germany, and so we've been in between Copenhagen and Berlin, basically.
No, but Denmark is. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's considered like the happiest place on earth, right?
Well, absolutely. We're the happiest people in the world.
I mean, I think they literally were ranked as like the happiest people in the world.
Yeah.
I think that's actually legit, right?
Yeah, we blame the beers, basically. I think that's the main point.
What is it? What is it about? What is it about Denmark that's so awesome?
Should I ask? What do you think then?
Both you guys. Yeah,
you probably have more experience than I.
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's not so easy when you grow up in a place to kind of like be objective about it. I feel, but I don't know. Danes are quite usually quite. Removed from being in a big country. I find maybe if I have to be a little analytic on it, like we now living in Germany, I definitely find that I can be a little bit more carefree about certain things. Being this little country that never really been to war. I mean, we're in the Second World War or something like that, and we got invaded by the Germans. So the Germans are the kind of the bad ones, and we're like the I don't know. It's I always seem to be little thing. There's not much that drags us down in a way, which makes us a bit these kind of happy valley kind of hobbits sometimes, beer drinking hobbits. So I think that might be it. It's difficult sometimes too.
They have a strong appreciation for the arts over there, don't they? That's pretty.
It's just, we were talking about that a lot too. Like, it's a big difference from coming to America. Just the whole support of arts, basically. It's a very different thing over here. I've been touring here 5 times now in the US, and it's always like you come home with like more hair in your chest, and you're being like much more strong afterwards. So I just the fact that in Denmark, for instance, you can apply for art what is it called, fundings or grants. Yeah. So like they would be quite good at like supporting arts in many different ways, and it's not so liberal as over here. So I feel that's great. It's also great, as I'm saying, to come over here and feel like the real need of art, because the ones surviving over here is the ones that people want to listen to or look at or whatever. So it's a very different story.
That's actually a good transition, because that's something I want to talk about, is kind of the evolution of our art and music, what music's place in society. Dan, like how do you feel like music as an art form, as a status in society, how do you feel like it's evolved or devolved in 2014 as opposed to 200 years ago?
Yeah. An idea I've been thinking about a lot lately is this kind of the way we have experienced life, and there's so many, we kind of experience 2 extremes simultaneously, and I think there's something to be learned from both of them, and I think that kind of parallels with music, in that you can have people that are like bashing pop music or what's on the radio, or like people saying certain kinds of music is too pretentious or too difficult. And I get frustrated with that kind of language, because I feel like both are necessary. And I think you need people to remind you to just have fun and let go sometimes. And you also need people to remind you that life is serious and people are suffering. And I think when one side overpowers the other, that's where I think there's a huge loss. And I think if I were to make any comment, right now, it does seem like the happy-go-lucky fun thing is kind of dominating more than a more, I don't know what I'm trying to be careful with my words here, but it's a challenge, It's like, I like listening to Katy Perry as much as I like listening to some weird, obscure, band from China or something. Like I can see value in both.
Yeah.
And do I want to listen to Katy Perry all the time? No, but I can appreciate the musicality of pop music. Or I just used her as a random example, but like I've never been a fan of trying to draw lines in the sand about genres or about the way people make music, And I think my whole thing is about keeping the playing field equal, so people can kind of go in between both. Like I think that's really necessary, and for humanity too. It's like you need to have humor. You can't, if you're always just in pain, you need humor to give yourself a break. And
now, as far as how you're approaching, because you've been writing for your third full length for the last year, and you talked about earlier about wanting to kind of strip things back, maybe make things a little bit more immediate. These Rumspringa definitely carry like some stronger pop sensibilities, and do you feel like that's kind of the direction you're gonna push even further on this new full length?
Yeah, I mean, I think I want to make something that can hit you in two ways, that hits you in your body, hits you in your gut, and hits you in an immediate way, which is I think what pop music does.
Yeah.
What hooks do. So I want to have that experience, but there's the whole other side of me and the whole other way I experience life that isn't represented by that fully, that I want to kind of be the muscle and skin of that skeleton, of that immediate skeleton,
Yeah.
So it's like, yeah, I want it to be, I mean, I always think about David Byrne and, the Stop Making Sense tour, and he he has this huge suit on, and so his head gets really small, and his whole point, if I'm remembering it, was just how the body responds to music, to art, before the head can tell you if it's cool or not. I mean, that's a very generic way of saying what he was, going after. And it's like, yeah, I want to have that immediacy. And that's what when I was touring Rumspringa Live, there are certain songs that I felt that way. Like this is connecting. I see people physically moving to what's going on, what the music we're making. And it's like, I want to go after that experience. And I want to make a record that does that for people. And then after they've experienced that, maybe the mind can engage and the heart can engage with what I'm saying and what I'm talking about with my lyrics and how I'm singing, and there can be that emotional connection too. So it's like I'm maybe borrowing some of the structure or the tricks of pop music in a way to kind of be a vehicle to what I was already doing and how my brain works,
So you grew up in Virginia, you live in Nashville now. However, the band's identity and your personal influences are almost exclusively European. I mean, you spent some considerable time in the UK. Why are you hesitant to kind of embrace, your American kind of landscapes?
It's not an intentional thing, and I do listen to a lot of American music, like The National is like one of my all-time favorite bands, for instance, or I could list any number of bands. I think I did have this thought one time where I was going through my record collection and I realized I barely had any music that was made in California. And I thought that was really interesting, just in terms of like where my head's at and what I connect with, And I think growing up in Virginia, the East Coast is so different than the West Coast, and it's way more European, obviously, because that has the closest connection to Europe. And I think musically, I've always kind of connected to darker things, and that tends to come more from Europe. I don't know an easier way to say it than that.
Yeah.
But so it's not so much avoiding American music as it is I'm just connecting to stuff that just happens to be from a different place,
Yeah.
But yeah, there's plenty of American things I love and value here.
We're talking about Rumspringa, his second full length that came out in 2011. He's currently demoing for his third full length. I mean, Colonies, your first album came out 2007,
Yeah.
Rumspringa 2011. I mean, there's some
I'm on the 4-year plan, man.
pretty massive gaps.
Don't rush me.
Is
Yeah.
it why the big delays?
I think life just kind of happens, in between records, and I definitely I'm very particular about what I want to do, and it sometimes takes me a really long time to feel satisfied with what I'm making and to feel confident enough in what I'm doing to put it out. And so there's a lot of trial and error and a lot of dead ends, and because it takes longer, like your influence has changed midway through the record. So like you're kind of going back to older ideas and inverting them, or like changing the colors of these songs that you started with. And so it kind of, for me, it's just I'm just not that guy that can just crank out songs like nothing, and I tend to produce as I write. So that also kind of delays the process. Like I don't really sit down on an instrument and write a song and then record it. I'm like kind of getting tones and making beats and trying to sing on top of that, and kind of these songs just evolve. It's all like one big messy process.
Yeah.
And so I think that kind of delays. I sometimes wish I wrote more traditionally, in that sense, because I feel like it'd be a lot more efficient. But maybe my haphazard way kind of gives me a different perspective than people that write in other ways,
Yeah, absolutely. Canon Blue, for all intents and purposes, is you. You are Canon Blue.
Yes, yeah.
Do you have any desire to be a part of a band dynamic?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've always kind of been jealous of those bands that they grew up together and make it big, like like Radiohead or Coldplay, U2. Like that dynamic is really, it's like, man, to get to have so much history with someone that you come from nothing and then you achieve something together like that. I've always found that really I don't know, just a rad thing. And so on a practical level, because obviously that's not going to happen now, I think especially with this record, and it started with Rumspringa, I've really come to see the value in collaboration. Because I feel like it's a little too late in the process for me to like bring on like new Canon Blue band members, and I love the idea of collaborating and having other people speak into the process. I think I respond well having other people in the room, and like I can think better, I can move faster, just having that extra body around to kind of I don't know, kind of bounce ideas off of and speak into the process.
Do you have any kind of time frame for getting into the studio?
Yeah, I mean, I'm kind of like I was saying, I'm kind of like always in the studio in a sense, and kind of because I'm always either producing or co-producing my records. I'm kind of recording for the final thing as I'm working. So I think I would love to have it finished by this summer and kind of get everything up and running again and get the live show, because I want to reinvent the live show and have a much different approach I want to take this time around. And so I'm just really excited to get things kind of moving again, get the band back together.
A band that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, but are you planning on producing all yourself, or have any hopes of bringing in a new set of ears?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, I would love to bring people in. Sometimes it's just easier just to do it yourself for different reasons, financial or just timing with certain people you'd want to work with, but they can't work for 6 months. Just there's all this sorts of things. So I'm kind of at this point moving ahead. I'm just going to work, and if something presents itself down the road, I would, by all means, I would love to have that. But if it ends up just being me producing everything, that's fine too.
Well, Dan, man, so excited for everything that you've been doing. Excited for this third full length to come out. Just have huge expectations to see you kind of take, get new territory.
Yeah.
To,
see you at the Grammys, man.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, Grammys 2015, guys.
Yeah.
But no, seriously, Rumspringa is one of the most gorgeous albums of the last few years.
Thank you, man.
I've been hanging out with Dan from Canon Blue and Casper from Efterklang. The third Canon Blue album hopefully will be available Grammy time 2015.
We're trying to fit it in just in time for the committee.
just in time for the Grammys. But Dan, best of luck on life, being a champion of all things that are great in this world. And Casper, thanks for flying in all the way from Berlin to join us on the podcast.
Pleasures.
Looking forward to chatting again sometime, maybe on the happiest place on earth in Denmark someday.
You're welcome.
We can have a big powwow there. So, Dan, seriously, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much for hanging with us.
It's been fun. Thank you.
This has been the New Country Podcast. My name's Brad. Thanks for listening.